In our last class, The Healthy Journey, we flipped the script on the standard weight loss formula by emphasizing the long-term perspective rather than the short-term perspective. We will flip the standard weight loss script again another way today by exploring an idea called the healthy identity effect. In contrast to standard weight loss programs that focus on the outside, such as what type of diet or exercise program you are following, the healthy identity effect refers to changes on the inside, helping you to embrace an identity as a health-oriented person. As we will see today, your goal of long-term weight loss success depends greatly on improving how you see yourself. In fact, without improving this area, no diet or exercise program is likely to produce lasting results. Here is a brief reminder of where we are in the Psychology of Eating series cycle. Today is Class 2 of the series, following the Healthy Journey class last time. Today's Healthy Journey class is part 2 of 3 what are called foundations topics that form the basic psychology principles supporting long-term weight loss. The next class on self-talk and thinking habits represents the third of these foundation classes before we move on to more specialized topics. Several years ago, the business author Simon Sinek published a book called Start With Why that would become a bestseller due to its provocative idea that success comes more from why you do something than how you do something. This is a counterintuitive idea. Most people think that business success comes from selling the highest quality product or perhaps the most useful product. For weight loss, the assumption is usually that the best results come from the best diet or best exercise programs. But it turns out that neither of these assumptions are true most of the time. The products and programs represent the hows in the success process. Instead, success more consistently results from the whys, representing a person's reasons, philosophy, and level of investment in the process. Although the idea was counterintuitive, the start with why concept is hardly new. For example, the famous philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche said as far back as the 19th century that he who has a why to live can endure almost any how. So even though this wisdom is hundreds of years old, we still tend to focus far more on the methods than the reasons. For our purposes here today, perhaps the single most powerful why that can drive weight loss success is because it is a reflection of how you see yourself. When a person is motivated by internal reasons, such as their sense of self, they have more long-term success than do people motivated by external reasons, such as their type of diet or exercise program. Understanding this difference between why and how, and learning how to use it as a tool for your personal success with weight loss, is our goal today. The quote at the top of the slide is attributed to the self-help coach Tony Robbins, who has spoken often in his career about the powerful influence of our personal identity or sense of who we are as a person on the choices that we make. One of the examples that Mr. Robbins uses, for instance, refers to people that are trying to quit smoking. His experience is that as long as a person continues to identify with being a smoker, it is very difficult for them to give up the habit of smoking. In contrast, he also argues that once a person comes to view themselves as a non-smoker, quitting smoking becomes relatively easy because the habit is no longer connected to their identity as a person. Because we enjoy the gift of consciousness as humans, we have self-awareness. We are aware, for instance, that we are separate from other people, with our own minds and personalities, attitudes, goals, and values. How we see ourselves is an invisible but ever-present influence on the choices that we make, much like how the invisible force of gravity controls how we move about in a physical way. For the purpose of weight loss, the idea of the identity effect is to help a person begin seeing themselves as a fit, active, and healthy person who is trying to bring their mind and their body into harmony, instead of as a fat or perhaps overweight person that is trying to make themselves lose weight. Some of you may have heard the story of the powerful elephant that can somehow be chained up with a simple rope or chain. Because this story is closely connected with the identity effect theme of this class, let's go through it briefly. First, as you may already know, the elephant is the most powerful land animal on Earth. Supposedly, there is an annual tug-of-war in China that pits 100 full-grown men against an adult elephant. In this story, the elephant always wins. The question is, if an elephant is so powerful, how do you domesticate an elephant for labor, as has been done in Asian countries for centuries? Obviously, overpowering the elephant would be virtually impossible. However, it turns out that all you need to do is get the elephant to believe that it is weak. Elephant trainers take an elephant at a young age and secure it with a strong chain or a very thick rope. Of course, it struggles fiercely at first, but eventually it accepts that it can't break free and becomes passive. With further training, the elephant learns that whenever it is tethered, even with a weak rope or chain that it could in reality easily break, escape is impossible and it no longer even tries. In short, the identity of the elephant goes from being strong to being weak. Despite the fact that its true strength remains enormous, it acts and functions according to what it believes rather than what it really is. This is a remarkable example of the identity effect weakening the potential of an otherwise powerful animal. A different version of this effect is often what happens to people as well, when they learn that they too are weak or incapable from lessons in their childhood, and then begin to live as if this is true despite great cost to themselves. Here are 3 questions concerning people's struggles with weight loss for you to consider, along with some possible answers. First off, why do people usually regain the weight that they lose? Why can people know exactly what to do but still not be successful? And third, why do some people seem to sabotage themselves over and over? If you listen to weight loss advertising and media articles, they tend to emphasize the factors on the right of this slide as the common explanations, except for the factor on the lower right concerning the wrong whys. Today I'll be arguing that this latter factor is in fact the primary reason for weight loss struggles, and describing in the next few slides exactly how this occurs. Although there are many ways to pursue weight loss, we can loosely categorize these many methods into 3 groups for the purposes of our discussion today. These categories can be called the bariatric group, the dragon slayer group, and the healthy identity group. Let's take a more detailed look at each group to explore the connection between their weight loss approach and the results that they obtain. The first group are patients obtaining bariatric surgery. Bariatric surgeries in the U.S. are increasingly common, with at least 250,000 of these procedures taking place each year. The research shows that bariatric surgery is by far the most effective way for people to lose weight, and this includes both shorter and longer term outcomes, with some studies tracking people as far as more than 10 years after their bariatric procedures. However, one of the factors that is interesting in this population is that even if you take 10 people who receive the same bariatric surgery from the same experienced bariatric surgeon, their outcomes will vary markedly. In fact, statistically, 30 to 40% of the patients on average will experience significant weight regain, with it not unusual to see some people regain even all of their weight despite operationally a successful bariatric surgery. How do you explain this high rate of poor outcomes? One of the interesting things that you observe working with patients post-bariatrically is that their self-concept tends to change much slower on average than does their physical body. 6 months after surgery, for example, a person may be 50 pounds lighter, but they often still remain the fat guy or the fat girl in their minds. As you might guess, those that maintain this identity as a fat person tend to struggle even after their procedure. The second weight loss group, by far the largest group in terms of sheer numbers, are the dragon slayers. I refer to this group as dragon slayers because the people that make up this group are fighters. They are, metaphorically speaking, modern warriors trying to defeat their own personal dragons in the form of excess weight. Dragon slayers are the people mostly making up the weight loss classes and support groups, and they are mostly the ones watching weight loss television shows and purchasing weight loss products. This group tends to use a combination of willpower and diet products to wage their personal weight loss battles. And it is a battle because the struggle for most of these people never ends. One lapse of attention, no matter how much success they've had, such as a bad holiday season or a major life stressor, and they usually quickly regain the weight that they have lost and then must sharpen their swords all over again for a new battle. You would think from a scientific angle that these dragon slayers should at least be comforted by the fact that they could be winning their personal battles at a higher rate, for instance due to our increasing number of weight loss programs and degree of nutrition information. But this isn't true. There is in fact no evidence that, despite the exploding number of diets and medicines and exercise products, that weight loss is any more successful than it was a decade ago. How would you explain this lack of progress? Thirdly, and centrally to this class, are the healthy identity group members. This group is harder to recognize, at least at first, because people in this group usually begin their weight loss journey as either dragon slayers or bariatric surgery patients. However, somewhere along the way, the healthy identity people make a mental shift where they are no longer so dependent on the bariatric surgery or the diet and exercise program to produce their weight loss success. Instead, the diet or bariatric surgery becomes for them just another tool to help them achieve their weight loss goals. Similarly, some people that begin as dragon slayers go from struggling every day to make healthy lifestyle choices to internalizing a healthy lifestyle so that it becomes easy and automatic for them rather than being the formerly daily battle. The healthy identity effect can technically happen to a person following any weight loss method, and that's because it is a change that happens inside of them rather than being a change in their external strategy. This healthy identity effect is the change that happens when a person begins to see themselves as a healthy person who naturally practices a healthy lifestyle, rather than as an overweight person or a food addict that is trying to arm wrestle themselves into merely acting healthy. To summarize these different paths to weight loss, we can organize them into a strategy that emphasizes the external weight loss component, including bariatric surgeries, diets, and exercise programs, and an alternative strategy that emphasizes internal changes that we are referring here today as the healthy identity effect. The science is clear that emphasizing the external weight loss methods is associated with poorer long-term weight loss results, suggesting that we need to do a better job helping people to recognize the importance of the internal changes and showing them how to make them. The healthy identity effect confuses some people because the terms can seem abstract and difficult to understand. So let's pause a moment here and define exactly what we mean by an identity. You can see here on this slide 3 brief definitions, with the last definition being the most accurate for the purpose of today's class. Naturally, an identity as a person is made up of many parts, such as your age, gender, ethnicity, professions, political preferences, and many other dimensions. However, a part of each person's identity also reflects their health preferences and health values. You might imagine, for instance, the health identity of an Olympic athlete versus that of a person who sees themselves more as a chocoholic. Can you also imagine how such different health identities would probably influence the eating habits of each of these persons? There is a spiritual expression that reads, "Our identity is like a bird's nest," referring to the haphazard ways in which a person usually develops their identity. We don't, for instance, choose our parents or the circumstances of our upbringings, yet these factors have a tremendous influence on the identity that we develop for ourselves. Had you been born in a different country, for example, you would identify yourself probably as a person of that nation, probably speak an entirely different language, and possess likely very different values. The point being that how our identity initially forms is often largely out of our control. You might think of your identity as a type of computer software program that was installed in your childhood, in much the same way that a computer or smartphone usually comes pre-installed with operating software from the manufacturer. Here's a question for you. If you bought a new iPhone and you didn't like the apps that came with it, would you simply resign yourself to the phone as is, or would you change the apps to fit your preferences? How about if you purchased a computer that, at least initially, didn't have the programs that you wanted? Would you just learn to live without them, or would you install them yourselves? As you may see from these examples, no matter the early life experiences that each of us, including yourself, may have had to form our initial identities, your identity is very much like a form of changeable software that we can upgrade any time that we want now that we're adults. For the purposes of this slide, imagine a set of 2 genetically identical twins that were separated at birth and raised in different families. One twin was raised in a very negative family that impressed upon the child labels and self-perception such as what you read here on the left. The other twin was raised in a very positive family that taught the child empowering identity values such as what you see here on the right. If there really were two children that grew up like this, developing polar opposite identities concerning themselves, do you think that this would, as adults, lead to different quality jobs, relationships, and health habits? Now consider what you think would happen if the child on the left really got off to this bad start, but as an adult was fortunate enough to meet their healthier twin sibling and learn the identity attitudes from the right. How do you think that this might alter the course of this person's life? Many people respond more strongly to images than to words, so here is a visual way to think about the power of a healthy identity. Imagine two people that thought of themselves using the analogy of a vehicle. One person, for example, thinks of themselves like a beat-up clunker, while the other person imagines themselves like a high-end sports car. Consider how this way of thinking might either inspire or discourage the person, depending upon the nature of their analogy. Now, there are many positive and inspirational identity analogies to choose from, and this slide shows examples such as superheroes. For example, if you were a superhero, what hero would you be and why? Cars, powerful animals. Again, the question, if you were a non-human animal, what animal would you be? Athletes, and then finally a couple of examples of an analogy of a creature undergoing a powerful transformation, such as a caterpillar or phoenix. For many people working on the goal of creating a healthier identity for themselves, it can be a great aid to them to find a visual analogy or metaphor to inspire them. Now that we have reviewed a lot of the basic information about healthy identities and how these identities can strongly shape the course of our lives, it is time to consider this topic more personally. Considering your own background and the many factors and influences that shaped how you see yourself today, is your own personal identity effect something that is helping you or harming you? If the latter, is this something that you are ready to address? Whatever your current identity, it becomes your reality in the same way that in our earlier example of the elephant becomes weak because it believes itself so. Our identity works its magic by shaping our values, how we think, and altering the decisions that we make. This process, ultimately and over time, then produces the results we obtain from our actions and creates the circumstances of our lives. Although you can do superficial things to change your outer circumstances, if you want lasting improvements in your life, then you have to develop a self-concept or identity that empowers you to achieve more of your own personal potential. If we compared your identity to a home or a building, then your identity effect would be much like the foundation that supports the rest of the structure. Without a strong foundation, no amount of outward design or effort is likely to produce a building that can stand up to the elements of life. Another way of considering how your identity or self-concept affects your life is to think of it as an anchor or a rubber band. When you drop an anchor from a boat, you intuitively know that you have just a limited amount of rope before that anchor will inevitably pull you back. This is similar to what happens when a person with a fat person identity goes on a diet. They have perhaps some modest to moderate amount of success before their unhealthy identity acts just like an anchor and slowly reels them back to their old weight. You might also consider your identity like a rubber band that is, on one hand, perhaps elastic enough to give you a little bit of wiggle room, but that will also eventually snap you back into place if you get too far away. Alternatively, a healthy identity can be a source of inspiration or guidance, acting more like a guiding star to help a person navigate difficult waters and make progress. Many people, unfortunately, think that their self-concept will change after they reach their weight loss goal. But that approach is what will often prevent them from ever reaching their goal in the first place. Much more powerful is to start changing your identity now so that it can become an ally throughout your weight loss process. Let's now spend a few minutes walking through some of the specific steps that we can take to create a healthier identity for ourselves. Fortunately for us, there are many different strategies to help a given person, but there is also a generic enough structure to these strategies to offer a basic formula. We'll look at this formula over the next 3 slides. The first step is to spend some time clarifying your goal. Having a clear vision of your desired result is the starting place for success in many achievements in life, and improving your identity is no exception. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine a future version of yourself that has embraced a healthy lifestyle. A version of you that relishes being physically active and eating high-quality foods. Imagine being proud of your body and the investment you make in it to look and feel great. This version of you is possible, but it will require changing how you think and what you value, just as it will require changes in how you live and behave. As you flesh out this healthier version of yourself in your mind, write down a few sentences or even paragraphs of how this version of you will think, act, spend their time at home and on holidays. The more specific you can be, the better this exercise can become a roadmap for you to follow. Step 2 involves taking this initial identity goal and committing to taking practical action steps each day to make it a reality. As much as we would like it to be otherwise, personal improvement is a gradual process rather than an overnight process. In Ben Franklin's autobiography, he dedicates a section of his book to describing how he went about improving his own personal character. After first listing all of the areas that he was dedicated to changing, a list that included more than a dozen different areas, he then focused on 1 or 2 areas for an entire month to improve them before moving on to the next. Even as talented a person as Ben would have failed if he had tried to change everything at once or to change too quickly. Thinking about your own process of personal change, where would be the best place to start? And what could you start doing in order to improve this part of your character? Step 3 involves 2 pieces. The first is taking time to review your progress and notice the changes that you are making. The second piece is the act of rewarding yourself for the changes that you are making. This sounds very simple, but it is the very opposite of what most people do. Most people, instead, don't track their progress and try to bully and criticize themselves into making changes. Imagine being a health coach to a person like yourself who is also trying to lose weight and improve their lifestyle. Would your coaching strategy for this person be to insult and guilt-trip them into success, or would you instead strive to be a source of support and encouragement to them? It can seem rather obvious when we think about how to help other people improve. Yet, when it comes to helping ourselves, we often fall back on strategies that cause us to fail and at the same time to even feel terrible about ourselves. So this third step is to adopt a healthy coaching mentality to your own personal improvement process, intentionally setting out to monitor your progress and help yourself feel good about the steps that you are taking. To summarize a complicated but important topic, today we introduce a counterintuitive idea that your long-term weight loss success depends greatly on how you see yourself. We introduce the concept of an identity effect, referring to the influence that a person's self-concept has on the choices that they make and the quality of life that they experience. We reviewed that the process of how we think about ourselves usually begins in childhood, often resulting from experiences that are at least mostly out of our control, and that can easily leave us as adults with an unhealthy identity that's centered around things like our flaws, mistakes, and our fears. We also pointed out, however, that even when we have started out life on a bad note, so to speak, it is possible still to rewrite our identities in much the same way that a person can wipe out viruses from a computer or upgrade the software on their phones. Finally, we discussed a specific process for how a person can go about recognizing the possible harms of their current identity and to begin molding their sense of self into a version that inspires and empowers them. Here again is the list of resources for people wanting to review the topics that we covered in this class today, whether you prefer a reading format or listening.